Good evening. It's good to see this number out. To be honest with you, this is more than what I was expecting. So, still got a lot of people that are sick. All right, open up your Bibles to 1 Samuel. Oh, Clarissa said she was talking, not bragging. There was nothing braggadocious in her speech. All right, so we're going to finish up cycle 3, and then we're going to kick it in reverse. So we've already gone through the United Kingdom, the divided kingdom, but those are, to me, the United Kingdom, the divided kingdom, and Judah alone. Those are the ones that, to me, are the toughest. And so we're going to review the United Kingdom and the divided kingdom and then push into Judah alone, and then we'll finish up with captivity and return from captivity. So whenever we open up to 1 Samuel, what do we see right there at the beginning of 1 Samuel? The stories that we see. So you got Eli, Hannah. So we're still in what time period? The judges. And who was the last judge? Samuel's the last judge. And what takes us from the time period of the judges to the divided kingdom? The United Kingdom? My head's divided. But all right, so they want a king. So where do we find that in 1 Samuel, where they are asking for a king? All right, so 1 Samuel chapter 8 is where Israel demands a king. And where do we actually see King Saul anointed? All right, so chapter 10, we see King Saul anointed. So we know that the time period of the judges ends with 1 Samuel chapter 9. So we've got the book of Judges, we've got the book of Ruth, and then we've got 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 9. So we pick up with the United Kingdom in 1 Samuel chapter 10. So again, Judges is Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 9. So one of the things that we at least mentioned last week is you've got two parallel stories that are going on in between 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and then 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. So two separate parallel accounts. All right, so we got to keep 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings kind of together. That's all one story. So those all go together, and then we'll jump over to 1 and 2 Chronicles. So right now we're going to just focus on the Samuels and the Kings. So 1 Samuel chapter 10 is what we're picking up with as far as the United Kingdom. And so as you turn through the book of 1 Samuel, where do we see Saul, quote unquote, losing the kingdom? What was that? Chapter 15, and what was the situation there? What had Samuel told Saul to do on behalf of God? To completely annihilate, obliterate the Amalekites, to kill everything. He did not. So he loses the kingdom at that point, but he still remains king. God said that he was going to replace him. David is anointed then in chapter 16, but David is not reigning. All right, so as we continue through 1 Samuel, Saul is still reigning at this point. And so through 1 Samuel, go ahead and turn to the end of 1 Samuel. And what do we see at the end of 1 Samuel? All right, so Saul and his sons are killed there in chapter 31. So that is going to be the extent of Saul. So Saul's life, his reign, is going to be found in 1 Samuel. Also, the early life of David is going to be found in 1 Samuel. And so if we wanted to know about the story of David and Goliath, it's going to be in 1 Samuel. So then in 2 Samuel, we see David beginning to reign in 2 Samuel. And as we turn through 2 Samuel, what do we see toward the end of 2 Samuel? What's that? Okay. So at this point, David is old. He's not dead, but he's old. And so, again, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings is all the continuation of the same story. So then we're going to push over into 1 Kings. And what do we see in 1 Kings chapter 1? We see that Solomon is anointed king. All right, so if we want to talk about the reign of David, it's going to be 2 Samuel. All of 2 Samuel is the reign of David. And so if we're talking about the life of David, his early life is 1 Samuel, his reign is 2 Samuel. Now picking up in 1 Kings chapter 1, we see Solomon is anointed king. And what's the thing that switches us from the united kingdom to the divided kingdom? What's the story that we remember?
Decision to rely on young wisdom.
All right, so we've got Rehoboam. And so as you're flipping through 1 Kings, where do we find that story? Chapter 12. So what do we see at the very end of chapter 11? So Solomon's death. All right, so in the first account with the Samuels and the kings, and talking just about the United Kingdom, we've got the reign of Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 10 to the end of 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel is the reign of David, and then 1 Kings chapters 1 through 11 is the reign of Solomon. So we've got 1 Samuel chapter 10 to 1 Kings chapter 11. All right, that is the United Kingdom in that story, in that section of scriptures, again with the Samuels and the Kings. So switching now over to Chronicles, again a parallel account, just a different telling of the same story. If you turn to 1 Chronicles, and again right now we're just sticking just with the United Kingdom. But obviously, if you know the end of the United Kingdom, then you know the beginning of the divided kingdom. So in 1 Chronicles, what's the first few chapters of 1 Chronicles? So it's all generations. It's the genealogies that we can read about, chapters 1 through 9. And then when we get to 1 Chronicles chapter 10, what does 1 Chronicles chapter 10 tell us about? What story? All right, so we've got the death of Saul in 1 Chronicles chapter 10. So that tells us outside of 1 Chronicles chapter 10, if we have anything that we want to know about Saul, it's in 1 Samuel. And I think I mentioned this last week, but 1 Samuel is such a rich book because you've got the story of Eli and Samuel, you've got the story of Saul, and you've got the early life of David. But if we're going to read in our Bibles about Saul, if it's not 1 Chronicles chapter 10 and his death, it's all contained in 1 Samuel. All right, so we're in 1 Chronicles chapter 10, and again, go ahead and flip through, and what do we see at the end? So we see David, he's made king in 1 Chronicles chapter 11, so we're picking up now with the reign of David, and what do we see at the end of 1 Chronicles? All right, so we see the death of David. And so when we're going to talk about the reign of David, it's going to be 1 Chronicles 11, or if you just remember 1 Chronicles and 2 Samuel. Those are the stories of the telling of the reign of David. All right, so beginning in 2 Chronicles, now we've got the reign of Solomon. So again, we're looking for this story with Jeroboam, with Rehoboam, over in 2 Chronicles, and the end of Solomon's reign. So if you keep flipping through 2 Chronicles, you see at the very end of chapter 9, you see the death of Solomon. All right, so with the United Kingdom, again in 1 Samuel chapter 10 is where Saul is anointed king, and then 1 Kings chapter 11 is where we see Solomon's death. So 1 Samuel chapter 10 to 1 Kings chapter 11. the United Kingdom, and then in 1 Chronicles 10 is where we see the death of Saul, all the way through the death of Solomon in 2 Chronicles 9. So that is your passage of scriptures for the United Kingdom. Again, Saul, David, and Solomon. All right, so flip back now. So we know if the United Kingdom ends in 1 Kings chapter 11, then we know that the divided kingdom is going to begin in 1 Kings chapter 12. And again, I've mentioned this several times. It's always helpful to me because I have it written in my Bible. I mean, I have a line drawn between chapter 11 and chapter 12, and I said, United Kingdom ends, divided kingdom begins. So I try to remember, but as I'm flipping through, just in general study, I always have that as a marker for me to remember. So 1 Kings chapter 12, and what are we looking for as far as what takes us to the next time period?
When Israel is taken away.
All right, so when Israel is taken away into captivity. So go to the end of 1 Kings. Let's see what's going on at the end of 1 Kings. Ooh, sorry. I was trying to cover it. Didn't do too well. So toward the end of 1 Kings, who do we see is king or is dead? Who? Ahab. All right, so Ahab is kind of in the middle of the reign of the divided kingdom. And this is just a note, something that I found interesting that I had never paid very close attention to. Whenever we're talking about the divided kingdom and the storytelling of the divided kingdom through the Kings and the Chronicles, one of the things that you'll notice is obviously you've got the story of what's going on up in the north with Israel and the story of what's going on down the south with Judah. And the stories as they're being told are kind of told at the same time. And so what happens is there'll be a section that talks about the story of what's going on in Israel. And then you'll have to back up and pick up with the story of Judah, and the story of Judah actually takes it just a little bit further than what the story that was told in Israel. And then Israel's got to pick up, and so the story is told, and it goes a little bit further than where it was at in Judah. And so if you think about it, and again, I've never thought about this, but if you think about yourself walking, you take a step, and then when your back leg takes a step, it goes a little bit farther, then it goes a little bit farther. And so what's actually happening is the storytelling, it's walking us through the story of the divided kingdom. You've got Israel, Judah, and I've never paid attention to that. So I thought that was kind of cool. So yeah, it's just walking us through the storytelling of the divided kingdom. So at the end of 1 Kings, we're still in the divided kingdom. So we pick up in 2 Kings, and if you just flip on over to 2 Kings chapter 17. And what do we see going on in 2 Kings chapter 17? All right, so the fall of Israel. So obviously the fall of Israel brings Judah alone. And so when we're talking about, again, the first telling of it with the divided kingdom, it's going to be 1 Kings chapter 12 to 2 Kings chapter 17. Now, again, we mentioned this last week. It makes it pretty easy in the telling of the kings because it's just very easily spelled out that Israel is taken to captivity and the reasons that they have fallen. So that's easy for us to kind of put a marker. So again, 1 Kings chapter 12 to 2 Kings chapter 17. So now back over to the Chronicles. Where did we end off with? In the Chronicles with the United Kingdom. Second Chronicles chapter 9. And so we know then that at the very end of chapter 9 was the death of Solomon. So we're going to pick up with the divided kingdom with 2 Chronicles chapter 10. And so, again, what we're looking for is the fall of Israel, but it's not as clearly spelled out in the Chronicles telling. And so one thing that we do know, it's very, very clear from the telling of the kings, we know who the king is in Judah when Israel falls. And who's that? He prayed and got 15 years out onto his life. So Hezekiah is king when Israel falls. That's made very, very clear over in the telling of the kings. And so we know that Hezekiah is king when Israel falls. And so we're looking through the Chronicles telling of the divided kingdom. We know that it's got to be in the chapters that are dealing with Hezekiah. And one of the things that we see over in Hezekiah chapter 30. I didn't know Hezekiah had a book in the Bible. 2 Chronicles chapter 30 is at the very beginning of 2 Chronicles chapter 30. It says, "Now Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah and wrote letters also to Ephraim and Manasseh, that they should come to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover to the Lord God of Israel." So I think that it's pretty safe to say Hezekiah is not going to be sending an invitation to those that are in the north when they're getting sieged and taken into captivity. Now, when Israel is taken away into captivity, not everybody is taken away. So there are a small number that are left. And so Hezekiah is sending an invitation to those that are left to, hey, come down and take the Passover with us. And so between chapters 29 and chapter 30 is more than likely when Israel falls. And so we're going to use 2 Chronicles chapter 29 as the end of the divided kingdom. So that's going to be 2 Chronicles chapter 10 to 2 Chronicles chapter 29. So when we're talking about the divided kingdom, we know, again, this is where we have the story of Rehoboam. So 1 Kings chapter 12, and then in 2 Kings chapter 17, we know is when Israel falls, leaving us with Judah alone. So in the telling of the kings, it's 1 Kings 12 to 2 Kings chapter 17. And again, 2 Chronicles chapter 10 is where we pick up, and 2 Chronicles chapter 29 would be the end of the divided kingdom. Clear as mud. It's not too bad. I mean, if this is the very first time that you've ever gone over it, yeah, this is crazy. What's that?
I've got each one of them.
That's good. So if this is, the first time you're seeing this, and you're like, man, I don't know that I'm ever going to learn this. And so this is going to take repetition. All right? So that means whenever we're done, I'm joking about giving you a test next week, but you shouldn't be done. All right? Just because I'm not going to be able to give you a test doesn't mean that, okay, I'm done. Jason's not teaching anymore. All right, we're done with this class. If you will continue to look at this and to review this in your mind, then it's going to become a permanent part of your mind. And so whenever you're thinking of the divided kingdom and all of these different kings, and maybe that's something that you want to aspire to do at some point, where you're going to start going through in every chapter, put with which king is with which chapter. That's not what we're worried about. All right, again, we're worried about the bounds of the time period right now. And so if you can remember that the time period of the divided kingdom is 1 Kings 12 through 2 Kings 17, and then the parallel telling is 2 Chronicles 10 through 29, then that will become invaluable to you. All right, so 2 Kings chapter 17 is where we ended off. And so we're moving into what time period now? So turn back over to 2 Kings chapter 18. What's that? Judah alone. Judah is now left alone. All right, so we're in 2 Kings chapter 18. And as we flip through 2 Kings, what do we find at the end of 2 Kings? What we see in chapters 24 and 25.
L11 is coming.
It's the end of it. It's the end of Judah alone. That's right. So Babylon comes in. Chapter 25, we see Nebuchadnezzar is besieging Jerusalem, and we see there kind of the first part of 2 Kings chapter 25, that Jerusalem is burned and plundered. And so that is the end, obviously, of Judah alone, because they're now taken away into captivity. Everybody's in captivity. And so Judah alone is a small section of scriptures within the Kings, in 2 Kings chapter 18 to the end of 2 Kings, which is chapter 25. So 2 Kings chapter 18 through the end of 2 Kings, which is chapter 25. So if you turn back over now to 2 Chronicles, and again around chapter 30, where Hezekiah is inviting everyone to the Passover. And if you flip through, who are the kings that we remember during Judah alone, the three that we really remember? Hezekiah, Manasseh, and Josiah. So as you're flipping through the end of 2 Chronicles, I mean, you can see the story where Hezekiah, his prayers answered in chapter 32. Manasseh succeeds him in chapter 33. Josiah succeeds Ammon in chapter 34. Josiah then dies in chapter 35. And so you continue on. And chapter 36, which is the end of 2 Chronicles, that is going to be the end of Judah alone. So, again, when we're talking about the time period of Judah alone, so 2 Kings 18 through the end of the chapter, which is chapter 25, and then Judah alone in the Chronicles telling is 2 Chronicles 30 through, again, the end of the chapter in chapter 36. Now, what's one of the things that you notice at the end of 2 Chronicles, the very end? All right, so there is a little bit of overlap. All right, we're just mentioning this. It's not anything that, obviously, if you want to remember all the details, then you need to pay attention. But there is a little bit of overlap. So Brother Waldron has not included this, and he did that intentionally just to try to simplify things. But there is a little bit of overlap that we see here. So, again, backing up the United Kingdom, it starts because Saul is made king in 1 Samuel chapter 10, and it takes us through the death of Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 11. And then we see the death of Saul in 1 Chronicles chapter 10, and we see the death of Solomon in 2 Chronicles chapter 9. So that's the United Kingdom. And so then when we pick again up with the divided kingdom, we pick up in 1 Kings chapter 12, and it takes us through 2 Kings 17, where Israel is taken away into captivity, leaving us with Judah alone. And then after the death of Solomon, in 2 Chronicles chapter 10 through 2 Chronicles 29, right before Hezekiah invites everyone to the north to the Passover, that takes us through the divided kingdom. And then Judah alone is going to be the completion now of the Kings and the Chronicles. So 2 Kings 18, after Israel's taken away into captivity, and now Judah is taken away into captivity in 2 Kings chapter 25, and then 2 Chronicles again chapter 30, where Hezekiah invites everyone to the Passover, all the way through to the end of 2 Chronicles chapter 36. So again, these three, to me, are probably the hardest, but it's all within 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and then 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. And so, again, remember those two parallel accounts. And again, if you'll just keep retelling this to yourself, it won't be so bad. All right, so now Israel's in captivity, Judah's in captivity, so we're in captivity. All right, so the captivity scripture should be pretty easy because we learned it with cycle 2. So it's no different with cycle 3. So what's the passages that we remember with the captivity? All right, Daniel and Ezekiel. And what do we notice is the difference between Daniel and Ezekiel?
One's in the city, one's in the country.
So they're both experiencing the captivity from two different perspectives. And so we see Daniel in the city, and we see Ezekiel with the people. So again, captivity, Daniel and Ezekiel. And I will mention this. Lena brought it up last week. She said something about, the prophets. So I haven't focused as much on the prophets just because I'm trying to get the story side of everything. And so that's going to be left for you to go back and include all of the prophets that are prophesying during each time period. All right, so with, again, the captivity, it should be pretty easy, Daniel and Ezekiel. Now, talking about the return from captivity. When I was talking to the high school kids Sunday morning, I said, well, if you can remember at least the last two of the returns, the last two of the three, then you've got part of it. And if you can remember the story that we've studied with cycle 2 that goes along with the return, you've already got 3 of it. So who do we say was the first return? Zerubbabel. All right, so then after Zerubbabel, we have Ezra. So you know that Ezra is going to be included in the time period of the return. And then after Ezra, Nehemiah. So you know Ezra and Nehemiah are going to be included in the time period of the return. Those should be given. You should always associate Ezra as the second return. And what was Ezra responsible for during his return? Restoring the law, restoring the worship. What was Zerubbabel responsible for? The rebuilding of the temple. And then Nehemiah, the wall. And how many days? 52. So I've told this story before, but whenever Jesse came here, I think it was in 2014, and held a gospel meeting for us, he preached the sermon, the 52 days, and it's one that I have never forgotten. And actually, when we were looking at a preacher, I'd mentioned that to all the men. I was like, well, I can tell you right now, anybody that can preach a sermon that so many years later I'm still remembering, that's a pretty good job. Well, Clarissa and I were at our niece's wedding on Friday night, and there was some guy that walked up and said that he knew Jesse, and we were talking about where I went to church, and he specifically said that he remembered him one time preaching a sermon 52 days. So I thought, man, that's pretty cool. So yes, Nehemiah rebuilding the wall in 52 days. So we've got Ezra and we've got Nehemiah. And then what's the story that we find kind of in the middle of Ezra? It's not told in Ezra, but it takes place during the middle of Ezra. Esther. All right, so now you've got 3. You know you've got Ezra and Nehemiah, and you know that you've got Esther. And so the only other thing that you've got to remember then is another one that should be easy is the return from captivity is the final time period before the years of silence. And so who is the final prophet? Malachi. All right, so you should be able to remember Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Malachi. Those should kind of be givens that you can associate with this time period. And now there are 2 other minor prophets that are included during this time period that I know we discussed some in cycle 2, but we didn't emphasize them a whole lot. But can anybody remember the 2 minor prophets that are also included in the return from captivity? Haggai and Zechariah. All right, so whenever you think about like the divided kingdom in Judah alone, and it's all kind of chopped up within the Kings and the Chronicles, this makes it pretty simple. You just got to remember the books. But again, we know that Ezra, part of the return, is included. Haggai and Zechariah are prophesying during the return. We know that Esther takes place during the return, And then Nehemiah, we know, is responsible for the third return. And then Malachi is our last prophet before the years of silence. It's not too bad, is it? All right, so now with the years of silence, what are the passages? Everybody's just smiling. The Maccabees. Gil said that, not me. Okay. All right, so we've got no scriptures that we have to remember with the years of silence, and so cycle 3 is pretty easy with the years of silence. Cycle 3 with the years of silence is a lot easier than cycle 2. All right, and then with the life of Christ, what do we remember? The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You know that one. We know that the early church is all told in what book? Book of Acts. And then the letters to the Christians is going to be everything else, all the epistles and Revelation. All right, so that is all the extents of cycle 3. You'll take the last 3? All right, so I'm not going to have you fill this out right now because I am a nice guy. I just want you to take this home, and this is something that after you review it again for yourself, I went ahead and just printed you an at-home quiz because I am such a nice guy. Nobody's agreeing, Bob.
Jason, should I use this time also to anybody, the families that have not received their book for next week?
Say what you want to say.
Yeah. We've got the books in for the class starting next week. Kyle Pope's. Okay. Now, one of these for family. So I know some of you got these on Sunday. So if you raise your hand, and I'll bring around your family books here.
I'm gonna take one.
You make sure you give Lena one of these.
I'll give her mine too. She's so ambitious. I have to.
Just trying to give you 3.
Yeah, you guys got one from Maureen, right?
You need one.
So, Miss Shirley and of course we're talking about next quarter. So, this class, the 3-cycle approach, was really the precursor to our 3.5-year study through the Bible. All right, so what we're trying to do is, again, kind of build the skeleton or the framework to be able to house all of this information in our minds. And so now we're going to start with the book of Genesis. And the book of Genesis is actually going to cover, if you don't have one of the in the beginning, so what we've done is taken Bob and Sandra Waldron's 9 volumes that go through the entire Bible, and we've broken it down into quarters. And so Genesis will actually cover 2 quarters. We'll study it in quarters 3 and 4 of this year. Jesse has questions in the back for this Sunday. So we'll start studying through Genesis. Now, what you have to understand is it's still 3.5 years, sounds like a long time. But when you're studying Genesis to Revelation, it's not a long time. And so we're going to be zipping through pretty fast to make it through the Bible. Eric, did you have something? He's just scratching your head.
If I could just, one of the mistakes I made first time through was in not, if I was teaching downstairs, not keeping up with the class upstairs. That was a mistake. So, you know, if you again, one per family, but recommend for light reading, again, if you teach it down another class downstairs, for that, don't miss out on this, it's too good to miss out on. So just a little commercial on.
I've had a bunch of books, but I don't remember that.
So the books change covers. It's the same material on the inside, but publishers will try to juice it up a little bit, and so they change the pictures. So we have done this before. Those of you that were here in 2018, we actually studied Genesis in Q3 and Q4 of 2018, but it's already divided up. Every week is divided up into the text in Genesis that you're going to be reading, and then the corresponding text in Bob and Sandra's book. And so Jesse's questions should have listed the text that you're going to read, and then the pages out of Bob and Sandra's book that you're going to read as well. Erica? No. So this is just a teacher's manual. If Jesse doesn't have it out there, I'll go ahead and print the class schedule, because everybody does need a copy of that. But if you are a teacher, then yeah, you need to make sure that you have a copy of this as well. Any questions about the new quarter? There is no one? Okay, I'll print the class schedule, and so that everybody can have a copy of that. I mean, all of this stuff is on the OneDrive. If you want to go get it and look at it, that's perfectly fine. We just didn't print one of these because this is designed as a teacher's manual, where with each lesson we have key passages, we have applications that you can draw from the passages that you're reading, and then kind of a synopsis, Cliff's Notes version of the main storyline. But this is really just for the teachers, but you're more than welcome to go grab it. It's all made available electronically. So Gil's got it on the website too. So it's there from where we studied it in 2018. So the dates are different on this book than what you'll find online, but it's all the same. So one thing that I wanted to read to you, so I had this book out at supper, and Zoe saw it, and she's like, a fourth cycle. So it's called the 3-cycle approach, but Brother Bob does mention a fourth cycle. So I'm going to just read to you what he wrote. So he says, often I'm asked, what is the next cycle? It is the most important cycle of all. If you have been following this outline carefully, you now have the boxes ready in the warehouse, the files ready on your hard drive, the skeleton ready for all future Bible study. So again, we were just laying the foundation for what we've got moving forward. He says the next cycle is learning what is in every chapter, learning every story in detail, learning the message of every prophet and of every epistle. Go back and get well acquainted with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Walk with Moses and the Israelites through the Red Sea. Stand with them at the foot of Mount Sinai and hear Jehovah speak aloud. Walk through that great and terrible wilderness to Kadesh Barnea. Then cross the Jordan with them into the Promised Land. Watch Samson lift those gates of Gaza and carry them over hill and dale to the hill just outside the walls of Hebron. Let David become one of your best friends. Weep as the kingdom falls apart and as those kingdoms become more and more wicked. Stand in the streets of Israel and hear Amos and Hosea cry out their message of doom. Ask the question of why with Habakkuk and hear God's answer. Weep with Jeremiah as he stands looking at the deserted, wasted city of Jerusalem. Rejoice and yet weep as the temple is rebuilt in Zerubbabel's day. Then live through the years of silence when God seems to ignore his people by sending no prophet. Stand beside the altar of incense with Zacharias and hear an angel speak for the first time in over 400 years. Rejoice with the shepherds as the angels announce the birth of the long-awaited Messiah. Let Jesus become your most intimate friend. Stand in awe at the empty tomb. Hear the sound of the coming of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost and listen to Peter proclaim the gospel for the first time. Watch as the early church grows and then is persecuted and scattered. But see that hardship only makes it grow faster. Walk with Paul over all Asia Minor. Sing with him in the dungeon at Philippi. Sit beside him as he writes to fellow saints and pours out his heart to them, to help them overcome some problem or to grow in their understanding of some concept about this new kingdom of the Lord. Finally, standing with John on the Isle of Patmos, and see the marvels of the great revelation, the beautiful glimpse of the final victory of the Lord and his saints. It is a lifelong goal. It is one that can be accomplished, and it is infinitely and eternally rewarding. The small effort is nothing in comparison to the eternal weight of glory awaiting us. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. And I wanted to read that because I love Brother Bob's ability to tell the story in such a synopsis. And this is one thing that if you were in my class last quarter when we were doing the A Generation That Knows Not God, how important it is to make it come alive. And I mean, just reading that, you can just feel like you're there and like you're a part of it. And so what we've just done, again, is gone through Genesis to Revelation, which is the story of Christ. And so make sure that you emphasize that if you are teaching the kids that are downstairs. And I would encourage you to continue reviewing this, continue studying this, because I think that it is a very, very valuable tool. Thanks, everybody.